This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, good. We didn't record the the lighter story.
All right. So thank you so much to everyone for coming here. And I'm pleased to welcome Nirav Patel, who is the founder and CEO of Framework Computer. Nirav previously held engineering and leadership roles at Apple, Oculus, and Facebook. In January 2020, Nirav founded Framework Computer, a company dedicated to making laptops more open and repairable. Framework has since launched two laptop models, the Framework Laptop 13 and the Framework Laptop 16, which have both been praised for their unique modular I/O, ease of repairability and upgradability, open source design standards, and sustainable manufacturing processes and designs. So Mika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep. So I'm Micah. I'm from Fairfax, Virginia, and I'm working on a new Hack Club grant called Onboard Live, which lets Hack Clubbers stream their PCB design work for $5 an hour. I have been involved in Hack Club for about a year, and I've made a lot of PCBs, too many to count, most of which were for my haptic feedback fidget toy, the eFidget, and I am a proud Framework 13 owner. Brody, you want to take it from there? Sorry. I have a question. What is the single best choice you made in your teenage years?
Single best choice I made in my teenage years. I would say the best choice I made was actually probably making friends with people who were not like the same type of nerd and geek that I was. Like it gave me just a broader viewpoint of how people view the world and how people think about things. Like people who are into the outdoors, people who are into like cars, people who are into things that like just were not on my radar at the time. And so like, obviously I had friends who were like deep into tech and like tinkering with computers, into software. But I also had friends who were like totally outside of that space, and like the connections between those two worlds really just unlocked a lot of stuff in my mind.
Awesome. Brody, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Brody. I'm a 15-year-old from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and I'm entering my freshman year of high school. I've been part of Hack Club for a few months, and I got involved with Framework actually through Framework 13 Factory Seconds that I earned through Arcade. This is the first Hack Club event that I've helped coordinate. So I also have a question for you, Nirav, and that's what's the most valuable lesson that you've learned from engineering roles that you've held that you either applied when founding Framework or just otherwise consider meaningful?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is really a lesson from Oculus, where this was the kind of stereotypical startup rocket ship trajectory where, we'd be going at like just insane velocity and people would be flying off and things would be like blowing up every week or every month. And we didn't really think proactively about what it meant to build a team or build a culture or build a company. And that was kind of okay because we were just iterating so fast and learning so fast about the actual product space and technology space that we're operating in. But it is interesting that 2 years in, we got acquired by Facebook. And so we were this, pretty nebulous structure with like, we didn't have an org chart. We didn't really have a lot written down in terms of like what Oculus was as a brand, as a company, as a culture. And we went into Facebook, which of course has, this very, very well-defined culture, at least at the time had this very well-defined culture and brand and set of processes. And so very quickly, actually, what Oculus was diffused out into what Facebook was, and what Facebook still is. And we actually lost a lot of the good things that we had in the first couple of years of the company that made it hard for us to actually continue to operate as effectively as we had been, especially like our ability to iterate really fast and build this like really collaborative culture started to fall to the wayside pretty quickly. And so in Framework, one of the key lessons was really early thinking about what we are as a company, what we stand for, who we are, the types of people we want to bring in, the types of culture and team that we want to develop internally, and writing it down and talking about it and communicating it so that as we continue to grow, which of course we have now over the course of 4.5 years, that we could really bake that in a way that's durable.
That's really interesting. Mika, would you like to introduce the rules?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple little rules. So if everyone could please turn on their cameras, that would be great. Raise your hand in Zoom if you want to ask a question. There's a little button. It's under reactions. Introduce your name, age, and where you're from before you ask your question. And when you ask your question, try to keep it short and unmute when you're called on, of course. And please only ask one question. All right. So with that, I think we are going to get started. Brody, do you have someone you want to call on, or oh, here we go. All right, let's go with Panos. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hey, I'm Panos. I'm from Greece. Thank you for finally shipping here. And my question is, what were some processes or ways of culture you encountered while working in Apple or Facebook that you liked or that you didn't like, and how did they affect you when starting Framework and the culture you built there?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that's pretty notable about Facebook and Apple is that of kind of the big tech companies, the biggest tech companies, they're almost at opposite ends from each other in terms of how they operate and what their cultures are. So Apple has this very, very siloed culture where even if you've got like a friend that you've known for years and they work at Apple and you work at Apple and you're getting lunch together, you actually can't tell each other what you're working on or even like vaguely where you're working or the things that you're doing. And so you have to, talk about anything else. It's just this totally bizarre culture as a result of that. And Facebook is, or at least at the time that I was there, was the opposite, which is that everyone could see basically everything. Anyone could talk to anyone. You could get a meeting with anyone you want to. And it led to, I think, a healthier culture. Obviously, like a bit more chaotic of a culture. It puts more onus really on leadership to like keep the chaos controlled effectively. But I think it led to a better working dynamic. And obviously in a startup, like it would never make sense to build silos. But as I think about Framework and continue to scale and grow, heading more towards the Facebook model of being open internally versus the Apple model being siloed internally is pretty important.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Would you like to go? I'm so sorry. I'm not exactly sure to pronounce your name. Surit?
Is it me?
Yes.
Okay, it's Shrit, by the way. Okay, so I'm Shrit and I live in India. So my question is that how did you grow your company? Like I make some tools and I figured out that it's very, very hard to get users on your, tool. So how did you grow? How did you, actually get started and get more users?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. One thing that worked really well for us in Framework just generally is that we're going into this mature category. And so it's basically, we don't have to convince anyone to buy a laptop or that laptops are a thing that's worth buying. Instead, it's convincing people that our laptop, our philosophy around the way we build our products is the one that they want to engage in. And so because laptops or computers really are such a mature category, there's this existing base of press, of YouTubers, of communities that all revolve around it already. And so the easiest thing that we could do was basically plug into the places where people were already talking about these types of products, whether that's like communities or YouTubers or press, and then basically just figuring out how to get reach in those places. And so for for YouTube or for press, it's sending out review units. And I had enough credibility based on my background, enough connections based on my background from Oculus that I was able to get those connections. And I actually knew a couple of independent PR people who we had worked with in early Oculus, who helped kind of pave the way to getting connections into some of the more traditional tech outlets. And then, of course, the product itself is the thing that gets people excited and brings them in. So, to the extent that the product is interesting and compelling and kind of appeals to people at a deep level, then as we get those articles and get those videos and get like people talking in the community, it spreads really quickly because people are excited about the thing that we've built.
Awesome. All right, and I'm just going to throw in one of our brainstormed questions over here. So what's the biggest bullet you've dodged as a CEO of Framework? Like, what's obviously nothing under NDA, but like, what's the biggest thing that you've avoided that could have been bad?
Yeah, sure. One thing that's been really good, we're 4.5 years in and we don't have like internal politics in the way that a lot of companies start to build after a few years. Obviously, that's not to say we're like perfect. We're operating like absolutely flawlessly or anything like that. But even as I think about, Oculus a couple of years in, or obviously Facebook or a lot of bigger companies, as you start to build your teams out, as you start to bring in like different types of leaders, people have, different working styles and different backgrounds that result in clashes that sometimes lead to politics. And in general, we've been able to avoid that. We've hired, people across the team, leaders especially, who are just really thoughtful and caring, and actually just care about the mission and the team and heading in the right direction instead of clashing with each other. So that's just been, we've been fortunate in that we picked the right people, brought the right people in, but also we've kind of like built a culture that encourages that type of behavior.
Awesome.
Sahidi, would you like to answer a question?
Yes, of
Or ask a
course.
question, sorry.
Of course. Hi, my name is Sahidi Desari. I'm a 17-year-old in Atlanta, Georgia. And my question for you, Nirav, is what's an ethical value or framework that you carry with yourself throughout your life, whether this is like at work or at home or like everywhere?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, it's openness is probably the biggest one. And this goes back to that like Apple versus Facebook mentality, where we're in Framework really kind of taking it to the next level in terms of openness. So that goes internally, of course, in terms of like anyone who is part of the team can see everything that we do and not just see like what we're doing, but have the ability to see why we're doing it or why we're making certain decisions. And that's something that we apply outwards as well. Of course, we share an unusual amount of documentation. We open source a bunch of the work that we're doing. We try to provide backing context wherever possible around decisions that we've made around the product, around the company. And that philosophy overall, I think, just leads to a better dynamic. And it's also just a core part of our brand and something that I value a lot.
Of course, thank you for that.
All right, and I just like to remind everyone that if you have a question, even if it's like a very like basic question, there's no such thing as a bad question, and we don't bite, so feel free to ask away. All right, so it looks like we have 2 people with raised hands. One moment. I think we're gonna go with I'm so sorry. FA, I can't. I'm sorry. You have a purple profile picture if you can see it. You want to ask your question?
Mm-hmm. So I'm Efe, 13-year-old from İzmir, Turkey. My question is, do you guys have any plans for laptops with the Snapdragon X Elite SoCs?
Sure. Yeah, I can't share anything about roadmap, but just in general, we always are connected to basically everyone in the industry. Like we talk to every silicon vendor, we talk to every module vendor. We always want to keep track of latest technologies. And then, of course, we're a small team. So ultimately, it's about focus. And so we have to choose of the many possible things we could build, many of which would be actually quite interesting things to build. We still have to select down to what are the things that we can actually build as a team, given just the scale that we operate at and the number of people that we have. And so like, as we think about a roadmap, it always comes down to like, we've got a dozen different things that we could be building. Which 2 or 3 things we want to build during a specific period of time that are going to drive forward the mission, that really address, customer needs, market needs, and lead us to continue to grow and scale.
Awesome. All
That's a
right.
great response. Thank you.
Yep.
Angid, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, I'm Angud. I'm from Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I actually live right by Brody. So I'm curious because I know Framework offers laptops for corporate. Do you guys think that businesses would rather have, let's say, a Dell machine, those are established, or a laptop that's repairable? Because budget, I imagine, isn't a huge concern, but reliability is. Even though frameworks, from what I know, are pretty reliable.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a really interesting one because when we started out, we assumed that businesses were not going to come to us. We really focused 100% on consumer. And then actually very quickly, we saw IT managers at mostly small businesses, but some mid-sized businesses as well, reach out to us and start asking for Framework laptops, being able to purchase them in volume, being able to purchase through like normal business purchasing methods. And the thing that we found actually is that, to your point, it was actually less about the cost of the laptop or like total cost of ownership over a period of time. It was actually more about control and ownership. And so like the thing that we learned was that for, let's say, a 50-person company that has one IT manager, they weren't really getting like commercial enterprise contracts with like Dell or HP or Lenovo. Instead, they'd go to Amazon or Best Buy basically and buy consumer level laptops or, small business laptops from like a retail environment and basically be getting consumer level support, which was, kind of okay. And the thing that they saw with Framework was that they could actually manage their computers at a much deeper level in-house. So being able to, swap out parts, or if someone in the team, an employee has an issue with their computer, they don't need to send it out to like a service center to get it serviced. Instead, they could just either have a part already on hand to swap out or just like pick up a part and be able to swap it quickly and get that employee back up and running. So that ended up being kind of an interesting learning. And so we've taken that and basically just continue to scale our Framework for Business program from there.
Awesome. I think next we're going to go to Haley. Feel free to introduce yourself and ask your question.
All right. Hi, Nirav. My name is Haley. I'm a 17-year-old from Toronto. So my question is, what are the biggest challenges you face in terms of designing and manufacturing your modular laptop compared to traditional models in terms of user experience and performance?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A lot of it actually comes down to connectors, which you'd expect for a modular computer. But it's basically like to a large extent, as we think about the external connectors, things like USB-C, obviously that's quite mature, it's really robust, it's really durable, but we have these unique challenges that come up as we think about internal connectors. Because for a normal laptop, an internal connector, like let's say a battery connector or like a ribbon cable or an FPC that's connecting to, connecting two boards together, basically, those would be things that would be cycled maybe 2 or 3 times ever. Like once when assembling it, if ever needed like a rework in the factory, maybe it needs to be done a second time. And maybe like there's one warranty service where maybe you'll get a third cycle. And so those connectors can be pretty tiny, they can be pretty fragile, and it doesn't matter because they're not really being cycled. But of course, for us, someone could be opening up their Framework laptop literally every day just for the fun of it to look inside and poke around. And so connectors, internal connectors that normally need like 2 or 3 cycles, need hundreds of cycles instead. And so that's led us to have to basically find, and in some cases actually develop new connectors that otherwise wouldn't have existed. And so we've been able to pull some connectors that were maybe more intended for things like automotive that have like higher durability standards. And in some cases, we've needed to develop our own. Like for Framework Laptop 16, we've got all those Pogo connectors that are things that we've actually custom developed with some Pogo connector manufacturers. And even on Framework Laptop 13, like the input cover connector on the main board, we used a part that was like, I think originally intended for automotive use, but then we actually ended up working with the connector manufacturer to modify some parts of that design to strengthen it. And that's something that we kind of like silently rolled in over a couple of years.
That's really interesting. I never really thought of that. Next up, I think we have a question here from Wolf.
Okay. I'm Wolf and I'm from Taiwan and currently studying in the high school. I saw Framework laptop is manufacturing in Taiwan, and why you commonly choose Taiwan, not like in other countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's back in 2019, 2020, basically just like, geopolitical situation was such that basically every consumer electronics company supply chain was China-based, mainland China-based. And almost every one of those consumer electronics companies wishes they had had some diversification, because we were seeing, trade tensions come in, we're seeing tariffs come into play. And so for us, starting from zero, starting from a blank slate, it was really obvious that we needed to take those lessons and be a bit proactive and basically not put ourselves at risk if trade tensions or tariffs were going to get worse. And so it was really obvious, just based on where the PC industry is centered, that Taiwan would be a good location to do manufacturing, because as you know, all or almost all of the headquarters of various manufacturers are in Taiwan. And so some of them still have production facilities in Taiwan. And so as we started to survey the landscape, we looked at a lot of different options and saw that the most streamlined thing that we could do as a startup would be to work with those manufacturers where their engineering teams are all in Taiwan, and then be able to have our production environment also in Taiwan. which meant that our team could go and work with the engineers and basically just take the train straight to the factory instead of needing to, travel from site to site. And 2020 rolls around, or mid 2020 rolls around, and everything locks down, and that ended up being like a very, very convenient choice to have made, because obviously for the team here in the US, we couldn't travel to Taiwan. The team in Taiwan couldn't travel anywhere, but we were still able to continue development and manufacturing because we had started hiring our own team members or framework team in Taiwan as well. And so they could work with our manufacturers and they could go straight to the factory, and everything was still operating smoothly throughout that period.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask a question from Leo, who's 15 from London and is moderating this AMA, but has a broken microphone. So how do you balance sustainability over long-term performance for your laptops due to their removable and replaceable nature?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. For the most part, there isn't a big set of trade-offs there. For the most part, the things that enable the product to work are things that also enable longevity. Like I mentioned, connectors, for example. One thing that actually does trade off though is materials in some cases, and so things like post-consumer recycled plastics. Basically, the higher you go in terms of recycled content, the material properties change a bit, just based on the basically like contaminants or other things inside of the recycled plastics. And so basically, like we wanted to go up to, let's say, like 50% post-consumer recycled plastic for something like the body of the power adapter, we'd end up with issues where if you drop it and it cracks, obviously there's a safety issue there because there's 120 or 220 volt AC. And so we actually ended up needing to reduce the recycled content of the enclosure on the power adapter down to, I think we ended up at like 20% or 25%, in order to make it strong enough to pass safety certifications, basically. And obviously that's something like plastics manufacturers are continuing to try to refine. But that's like one of the rare instances where there is a trade-off between sustainability and like longevity and performance.
Very cool. I also have a question here from chat. This is from Daniel L, whose mic also broke. And he says, do you have any plans to market Framework to the average consumer? Because even if you stick to only the hobbyist and maximize your market share in that area, you will still be very limited.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So we've been very deliberate about making sure that like as a brand and actual like the design of our products, the industrial design and capabilities of products, that they are pretty generally applicable to people who are not necessarily DIYers, who are not necessarily enthusiasts, people who just want a good solid laptop. But from a go-to-market perspective, basically like the types of marketing that we're doing, the channels that we're trying to reach, we've been really deliberate about starting from audiences that we knew would be the most receptive, because that's the most efficient way that we can operate. And then as we continue to mature our brand and continue to mature our infrastructure and mature our products themselves as well from like a performance and quality standpoint, then we're taking more deliberate actions to go and try to broaden the audience as well. And so even if you look at like Framework in 2021 versus Framework this year, you can see that the types of content that we're doing, the types of like writing and photography that we put on our own website, we've been deliberate about making it a bit more accessible each year as we go. And that's something that you'll continue to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Daniel also has a follow-up question here. He says, also, how do you plan on making profit once you have enough market share and you only sell repairs or upgrades?
Yeah, sure. It's going to be a good problem to have. The laptop market's a $200 billion a year market currently. So even if we like shrink that down substantially as we continue to capture market share, we can build a really, really healthy business just on upgrades and parts and replacements and so on. And so basically, like we're not that worried about reaching a point where the dynamics of the industry actually change, where it is more of a replacement-driven industry than a have to buy total new laptops. It's still good for us as a company, and of course, good for everyone, really.
All right. So we are going to, or I'm going to call on Fazan. I'm sorry. Would you like to ask your question now? Fazan, are you there? All right.
Yes,
guess-
I'm here.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. There we go. There we go.
I'm 11 from India and I want to know that when
I
I'm
think,
from India. Hello?
yeah, we can hear you. It's just a little slow.
I'm from India and I'm 11-year-old and I want to know that when would you launch framework in India?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've been really deliberate about country expansion. That's actually surprisingly one of the biggest challenges entering new markets. And it comes down to just the immense amount of infrastructure that you need, not so much from like a shipping standpoint, but for everything else. So basically being able to legally operate in a country requires, in many cases, like establishing a business entity, requires working through the customs process, requires certifications, requires basically being able to manage taxes within that country, being able to have local support, so things like reverse logistics if someone needs to return something, and of course, like being able to support things like currencies and languages. So there's quite a lot of complexity that goes into it. And so basically every year we've been deliberate about kind of slowly entering a few more countries at a time. And this year we shared that we have launched in, let's see, I think 4 or no, more than that, I guess, about 7 new countries so far this year within the EU. And the reason that we've been doing that is because we did actually establish a business entity in the EU that enables us to scale to each country in the EU relatively easily. And then basically after we complete all of the EU, then we're going to start to look at what's the next country or set of countries that are going to be basically the highest ROI in terms of like the amount of effort it takes to go and set up there versus what we think we can drive in terms of reach within that country. And so, of course, we want to get to all of the world. It's going to take us time to get there.
Yeah, and my second question is that how did you start, how did you know about Hack Club in the first?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. I think we got reached out to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
that was Zach, the founder of Hack Club, and me. Or no, we had a connection with your intern or something like that.
Yeah, Heath Smith. That's right.
But yeah, super cool. All right, so I have a bit of a fun question. What is the best Easter egg you've either put in an electronic device or seen in an electronic device?
Yeah, so in the Oculus Rift DK2, and I don't know if anyone even spotted this, but there's actually the initials of the electrical team stenciled in like an inner layer on one of the PCBs. So it's not like maybe the best one, but it's one that I think as of yet hasn't been spotted that I'm aware of. Maybe so it's very Easter egg.
That's amazing. I mean, I bet now once this goes on YouTube, we're gonna see people tearing apart their Oculus. All right. Well, yep.
Yeah. Next up, Suptik, would you like to answer your question? Or I'm so sorry. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I'm Suptik from India. My question would be like, what was your first programming language that you learned?
I'm sorry, your audio is a little bit quiet. I think you asked what my first programming language was.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Let's see. What was my first programming language? It must have been BASIC. Like this was a long time ago. So I guess it depends on how you define programming as well. But like I think as probably is still the case in 2024. Writing BASIC on TI-83 calculators during math class because it's not interesting enough otherwise. So that was one starting point. And then probably like the next language after that would have been probably C actually, to like start doing like some low level stuff on microcontrollers and just some like systems programming.
All right. And I think next we are going to go with how about is there anything you would go back and change about the Framework laptop?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. A lot of it is stuff that like as we look at Framework Laptop 13 to Framework Laptop 16, they're things that we addressed. Like one very specific one is actually a battery connector. So we had a connector that has a cable and has a basically just like a normal like wire to board type connector. And it works, like functionally it works, but it's definitely not the easiest type of connector to insert and remove. And so for Framework Laptop Switch 16, we switched to like a blade type connector that just drops right in. Obviously, it's a lot easier. So, you know, in retrospect, that connector probably wasn't the best one to use. We could, you know, ideally we would have used a blade connector on the 13.
All right.
It's really interesting. I also have a little bit of a silly question here. Is a hot dog in a bun a sandwich?
This is the classic. Like, is a taco a sandwich? Is a hot dog in a bun a sandwich? I'm gonna go with it is not a sandwich. I'm gonna say the sandwich requires two separated pieces of material with stuff layered between the two separated pieces. And if you're folding, then it must be a taco, which means that
Okay.
a hot dog is actually a taco.
Sure.
All right, and I think we're gonna go.
Book is a taco. Yes.
Yeah.
Wait. One moment. I think we're gonna go to. Oh, sorry. How about Asher?
Okay. Hi, I'm Asher. I'm 17. I currently live in Colorado. And my question is, what sorts of firmware issues or things that were tricky when you're developing like the BIOS or talking between all the different chips on the motherboard?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. So one challenge that we have is that we don't own the BIOS. We license an off-the-shelf BIOS, and this is something that we looked like really, really deliberately at. And we basically found that like if we wanted to head our own direction on BIOS, it would put us really far behind schedule-wise on being able to actually ship a computer. And part of this is that like let's say we just launched Intel Core Ultra Series 1. We're licensing this off-the-shelf BIOS from a company called Inside, and it works really smoothly because Inside and Intel worked together for basically like a year before we even started engaging on that platform, which meant by the time we started, there was a really mature BIOS ready to go. Whereas if we wanted to develop our own, then we would need to start when Intel was ready for us to start with them, start developing, and then end up being like really late to market on any platform that we're doing. And so one of the challenges that we have that regularly occurs is that of course our embedded controller firmware is open. We control it entirely. We end up being able to manage that really effectively. The BIOS is closed, and we have limited access to it. And so as we basically need to do things, we end up having this like chain of actions that need to occur from like us identifying something to it going to actually our manufacturing partner, and then to the BIOS vendor, and then sometimes to Intel to get like the end, or AMD for AMD systems to get to like the end thing that we needed. That's something that like we're going to continue to navigate to see if like is there a point in time where we can flip that switch and get open BIOS that we have access to streamline some of those interactions. But at least so far, this is sort of the mode that's been most effective at our scale.
Awesome. So I think we're going to ask a question from the chat. So this is a bit of a specific question, so we're going to expand it a little. And the question is, have you met Steve Jobs? And in general, who is the most interesting person you've met?
I haven't not met Steve, or I did not meet Steve Jobs. I did see him on campus though. Just basically walking around. So I was at Apple from 2009 to 2012, which obviously was the time period when he was there. And so, saw him. He used my computer for a demo that we were doing at FaceTime at one point. So I had to give up my computer to like someone on my team who was doing the demo. Never got the computer back. I have no idea what happened to it. Anyway, so that was that. In terms of like most interesting people or person, I would say it's probably a tie between Mark Zuckerberg and Palmer Luckey, who are both very, very unique individuals. And I had to pitch Zuck on VR headset or VR roadmap related stuff a number of times. He has like a very, very, he's a very capable individual. He's unique in that like of all the big tech companies that have kind of rotated out CEOs, where the founding team went off onto their $200 million yachts and are sailing in the Mediterranean. Zuck is still there, actually like grinding every day, and it's cool because he actually like has like a pretty deep understanding of like the dynamics of what Facebook is doing, like the business dynamics, the technical dynamics, and is able to engage at a pretty deep level on really, you know, any part of that very, very complex business across the span of things that Facebook does.
That's very cool. Next up, I think we have a question here from Ponderslime.
Hi, I'm Micah from Colorado, and I'm 14. And if you don't mind sharing, what was one of the funniest moments from Framework?
Funniest moments from Framework. Ooh, I'm trying to think of one that's appropriate to share. There's some that are inappropriate, unfortunately. I know this is being recorded, so I'm not going to go for those. Let's see, what's an appropriate thing that I can share that's fun, that's funny? Yeah, this really is a tricky one. Well, this isn't like this is kind of like an odd one. But this is like March 2020. We were doing our first like technical workshop with our main manufacturing partner, Compal. And this was like just as it looked like things were starting to get weird, you know, globally in terms of pandemic, but like things hadn't locked down yet. And so we you know had this workshop planned. We figured like, okay, it should be okay. We can just go to Taiwan and do this workshop. And stuff started to like happen as we were going out there. And so like as we were out there, Compal, this manufacturing partner, they locked down their own facilities, and so we couldn't actually go to them to have a workshop and like have a technical meeting. But the team that we're working with there was like, no, it's okay. We'll just come up with something. We'll come up with something. And so instead of meeting at their headquarters, we met at a cafe next door. And so we spent the day like booking out this room in this cafe, doing this like technical deep dive to get to the Framework Laptop 13. And as soon as we flew out, we got like one of the last flights out of Taiwan before they really locked everything down. And one of the members of our team, you know, caught like something, was like a little bit ill, and so we actually have no idea what it was in the end. But we obviously notified Compal, and so they ended up having to put everyone that we had any interaction with, which was like 50 people, into quarantine for like 2 weeks. So it was like our first interaction with this manufacturing partner was like, sorry, we had to lock down your entire organization.
All right, very, very interesting. So now we're going to go to somebody else. Can you please introduce yourself and ask your question?
So, I'm Ethan from Ohio. I'm 14. And my question was, what is your favorite programming language?
My favorite programming language, I'd say it's probably a tie between Python and C. Python is it's just so easy to like prototype stuff in. It's so convenient. But C, it's also fun to like get to lower level and be able to like really optimize stuff. And obviously like, you know, messing around with microcontrollers and things, C is a really, obviously it's like a dangerous language, but it's also just a fun language to use.
Cool. Python was my first language, so.
Great, yeah.
Awesome. And now I think we are going to head over to, actually, wait one moment. We have something we do in some of these AMAs where we turn the tables around and you ask us a question.
Sure, yeah, asking everyone a question. Let's see. What's everyone most hopeful for the future?
So I will start, and then you can just raise your hand, and we'll call on people as we go, or as you raise your hand. I am really hopeful that repairability becomes mainstream. Like, I promise, I'm not just like trying to be like, oh, Nirav is the best. I actually really love repairable devices, and I think that needs to be a more mainstream thing.
Awesome.
Does anyone else have something they are hopeful for to answer Nirav's question? All right. I think I saw a few hands raise. Asher, why don't you go?
Okay. Something I'm most hopeful for is actually to start my own business, building really small robots. Um, and it'd be nice if I could open source it, but sometimes open source means others steal your ideas. But yeah, I think it'd be really cool if I could start that business like within the next 10 years.
Nice.
Awesome. And I think we're gonna go over to how about Panos?
To answer the question?
Yeah, to answer Nirav's question, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with what Micah said about repairability, and to add to that, just being able to own your stuff. Like yesterday, I set up a Nextcloud on my NAS at home, and it was really simple actually, and ignoring the data safety and stuff, but like being able to own your data and your personal information instead of having to just hand it away and expect someone to take good care of it and not use it for profit or anything like that.
Nice.
If there's anyone here that's interested in answering Nirav's question, you can just talk.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I go?
Yep.
Something I'm hopeful as of recently is open source language models have been getting better and better. And I feel like sometime in the future we'll have like a good enough one that, it's like efficient on system resources and doesn't require you to pay a few $1,000s for some expensive GPU. But at the same time, you don't have to reach out to some third party. But I think what I've seen from the past few years is like very promising.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great one.
All right. Brody, you wanted to read a few from the chat?
Sure, yeah. We have a couple other answers. We've got world peace, that Andrew said. Daniel said, I hope the worlds understand that we can't continue producing new stuff and instead reuse old stuff and create from the start good products that last. So some of the sustainability aspects. Dylan said, I'm hopeful that more people make things because they want to make them and that other people appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's
All right.
a really interesting question. Thank you.
Awesome. And if that's all the answers to that question, then we can move on. Brody, why don't you take us forward?
Sure. Philip Isam, do you have a question for Nirav?
Yes. My name is Philip. I'm from Egypt. And my question is, since you've worked like in Apple and Facebook before, so you have like an idea about job offerings and stuff. What is like a tip that you can give to us as like 16-year-olds to 18-year-olds applying for like big tech company jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it varies a lot by company and by hiring manager. But at least when I was at Apple and when I was at Facebook, one of the things that we looked for engineering roles, especially, was portfolios, because oftentimes we'd see people are largely taking the same types of classes. There'd be a large number of people who had strong GPAs. And so to stand out, it was really like, what were people, obviously, like all of you in Hack Club are ahead of the curve there, but basically seeing like, what were people doing beyond class projects, like taking the things that they had learned, applying like their own interests and passion to it, and then building stuff. Because I would show like, oh, this person really gets, this topic, to the point that they're creating like net new things in that area based on what they've learned, which is always like a really good indicator.
Awesome. So next, I think we're going to go to Raymond. You had a question?
Yeah. My name is Raymond. I'm 17 and I'm from San Diego, so it's Southern California-ish. And my question was, if you could build any expansion bay module for the framework, this, and if you don't count like technical constraints for like free, what would you build?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. We've seen the community actually start building some of the cool ones that we had thought of, like an Oculink connector to connect like an eGPU, for example. There's like a couple of different community members who are taking attempts at that, which we thought was quite cool. I would say like an interesting one would be cellular radio. And we haven't done it. We've actually seen a couple of attempts in the community as well there. But obviously there's enough space inside the expansion bay to be able to do an LTE or 5G radio. It's quite complex from like a certification standpoint, especially, putting in an antenna and then going through the entire like regulatory process for doing it, which is why it's not something that like we've invested in yet, but it is still something that, absent that constraint would be pretty cool to be able to do.
That's really interesting. Next, I think Amika has a question.
We can't hear you.
It looks like your microphone isn't working. If you would like to ask it in chat, we can also ask Nara from there.
All right. Perfect segue into repairability. I mean, microphones everywhere keep breaking. All right, so the question is, what advice do you have for staying fulfilled in an office job, like keeping your purpose and not getting burnt out?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, there's basically two paths, and it depends on the company that you're in. Either you're in a company that gives you growth paths and gives you basically just fulfillment and the types of projects that you're working on. And those types of companies, yeah, just go all in. Take as much ownership as you can. Work on whatever interesting thing comes up within your role, or if you see like adjacent areas to what you're working on that are interesting, go and like talk to people and see how you can help out. So that's path number one, which is great. Obviously, not always possible. Not all companies operate that way. And so then path number two is have side projects, basically outside of work if you're not fulfilled, and then look for that opportunity to go and jump into a company as you're able to over time that does bring you fulfillment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Next, I think we have a question from Hamza.
Hello, I'm Hamza and I'm in Maryland. I was wondering, how much do you think your company being based like near Silicon Valley helped like as a startup, like finding talent and resources? Do you think it's like very important to be somewhere like that, or can you start a company like Framework from anywhere?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. It depends on what you're optimizing for. Like if you're willing to basically go all in and you're aiming at building the best, biggest thing possible, Silicon Valley is still the best place to be. It's the center for fundraising activity. It's where you can make the most connections. It's where you can hire, in many cases, a lot of the strongest people, especially in specific specializations. And obviously that comes at trade-offs. It's the most expensive place to operate, which means that you do need that funding environment more than you might otherwise. And so like basically if you're trying to build a high growth company in most categories, most verticals, the Bay Area is still the best place to do that. And obviously as a lot of interesting activities happening around AI, machine learning right now, it's also started to become very centralized in this area. That doesn't necessarily always apply though. Like there are categories where there's greater strength outside of this area. Like Boston for certain things, New York for certain things, LA, and then obviously around the world there's other different centers. But then there's the flip side of it as well, which is that you can build not a business that's like deliberately aimed at like, let's grow as fast as possible at all costs, but instead let's build as sustainably as we can, like economically sustainably as we can, and build something that's important and be really efficient at it. And that actually, I would say you should just build wherever you are. And then there may come a point in time where you see that, okay, actually we've gotten proof that the thing that we're building is going to have traction, that we can turn into a high growth business. And at that point, it may make sense to then go and move to a place where you can grow faster.
Okay, very interesting. Let's go to Andrew next.
So I'm 15, I'm from Montana. I've had my Framework 13 with the AMD 7640U for about 8 months. Are there any specific upgrade paths you'd recommend, like mainboard or screen or whatever?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, great to hear that you are a customer. So we did just release a new display, 2.8K resolution display. So if you're a Linux user, that's pretty good. And then beyond that, obviously, it's still a really new platform. It's just released last year, and so I would say it's got probably several years before you really need to upgrade anything major beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, next, we have a question from chat here too. This is from Abhay. What are some things you love doing outside the computer world? What are your hobbies?
Yeah, well, I don't have as much time anymore for hobbies, but I did enjoy, or do still occasionally enjoy, woodworking, cooking, gardening, basically stuff that's on the opposite end from things that use computers, things that are really using different parts of your brain, using your hands for stuff. It's nice to have that balance.
And then I know that we're getting to the end of our time a little bit here. Is there any chance that you could stay for another 15 or 30 minutes, Nirav?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can keep going for another probably
awesome.
15
Thank
minutes.
You so much.
Yeah.
All right. Kieran, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would. My name's Kieran. I got I'm talking on a Framework 13 right now, from Arcade. So thank you so much for collaborating with Hack Club for that. That was amazing. I guess my main question would be, actually, I don't really know what my question was. I just really wanted to thank you for partnering with Hack Club and for making frameworks. They're awesome.
Cool. Yeah, no, great to hear that. It's been fun participating in this.
All right, so I think next we're going to go to Panos.
Hey again. So what in the far future, what other products do you think Framework or product categories do you think Framework could branch out into? I've seen lots of people want very religiously a Framework printer because we really need a printer that isn't atrociously bad.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I can't share specifics, but just generally, we look at categories that are going to be efficient, because it is we look across consumer electronics and we see that there's opportunity everywhere. We know that people are frustrated with products in almost every category. And so we can also think of ways that we could build better products in almost any category. And so then it turns into, what can we actually be successful at and be able to scale at efficiently? Obviously, we get a lot of ASCII printers. Printers are one of the hardest categories from just a business dynamic standpoint. And part of the reason that, they've ended up in such a bad spot is because for any of the companies participating in it, the economics are just really weird. And so that makes that category just an especially interesting and challenging one. And the same applies for really any category that we look at. It's that balance of what can we do that's unique, that solves problems for people? What can we do that improves the business dynamics in that category? And is it a category that we can enter efficiently based on our team, the things that we know, the things that we're able to build, the supply base that we work with, what it would cost to enter that category from a development standpoint, and then also what it would cost to enter from a go-to-market standpoint and marketing standpoint. And then we use that to think through then what are we actually going to go do?
Yeah, so a natural category would then be computer peripherals in general. So someone in chat mentioned being able to turn your trackpad into an external trackpad, or maybe your keyboard into a Bluetooth keyboard. I would really want to see being able to take out your older screen and make it a secondary portable one and keep it instead of having to sell it or throw it away or anything like that. So maybe that would be a good idea for the future.
Right. Yeah, and peripherals in general also just more efficient.
Computer peripherals.
Yeah.
Both for a logic standpoint and being able to expand, being economically and logistically viable, I guess. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, and we just have one quick logistics question that matters to everyone. If someone comes with a question later, or if their question didn't manage to get answered, will we be able to send you a list of questions and have you respond at some point?
Yeah, sure. That sounds great.
Awesome. We'll coordinate that later.
Yeah, and then we also have a question from chat here. This is from Aditya. What has been your biggest learning experience as a CEO so far?
Yeah, biggest learning experience as a CEO. I mean, I was very fortunate to have seen a lot of basically building a business up close in Oculus, and so I was able to not repeat a lot of the same mistakes that we made. I would say then like a lot of what was new in Framework was really like the fundraising dynamics and like basically learning how to fundraise, which is quite a different skill set than learning how to build a product. And a lot of it comes down to actually like trying to understand the psychology of the investor, like what are their goals, what are the priorities, who are they beholden to in terms of like their own investors, their own LPs, for a venture capital firm, and what types of information, what types of signals are they looking for, and then basically optimizing messaging and optimizing like when you reach out, what you reach out with against that. Which is obviously if you're someone who's planning to start a business, it's an important thing to try to start learning because it's quite important to be able to be able to fundraise, to be able to take on bigger initiatives and build a bigger company.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have a question based on a couple that I've seen in chat here, and that's what are the most interesting interactions you've had with employees or other people that you've worked with?
Yeah, I'd say we have a really incredible team. So that's one thing I'm always grateful for. And we've had interactions that like obviously a lot of interesting technical interactions or operational interactions, but also like just interesting cultural interactions where we have people on the team who just care really deeply about how we operate and what we are as a company, and who also take it upon themselves as culture carriers to come in and try to basically like define that and help to kind of empower some of these like cultural pillars, like openness, for example, like people who like have taken openness as something that's like a core principle of theirs and help to do what they can to drive that forward.
Awesome. So I think next we're going to go to Philip Hitter. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. What was your college major, and what is like an experience? What was your like experience in college?
Yeah, so I did electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon. And something that was pretty valuable was that there were a lot of project-based courses that would basically involve building like a little mini product throughout the course of the semester. And so that was like kind of good exercise to have to think through the total span of things that goes into creating something new. In kind of a structured way where it'd be like team based often. So those types of courses I thought were especially valuable.
All right.
Next, I have a question here from George in chat, and that's what books do you think helped you in your dreams?
What books helped me? Yeah. Well, actually, I'd say I read a lot of science fiction, actually. So more so than like nonfiction books that are like advice-based books. I found science fiction to be quite helpful. Basically, just to like think openly about the different possibilities of the future. And the interesting thing about science fiction is that like it's rarely the things you're extracting from it are rarely like technology, because obviously it's all fictional technology. It's really more like what are the societal impacts of changes. Like if you took the world as it exists today, or the world as it could exist in, let's say, 10 years or 50 years, and you tweak some like core parameter, like let's say this new type of technology exists, or this like fundamental assumption about society or the world changes, how does that change how people behave, or how does it change how society or civilization goes forward? And it just leads to these like really interesting, I think, kind of thought models about how the actual world operates as well.
Okay, very, very interesting. I've always found books such an interesting way of learning more about everything. So now we're gonna go to Dom-san. Could you ask your question?
Hello, I'm Domson, and I'm an 18 years old from Poland. Do you have some kind of internal fear that some other company might start producing cheaper modules for your laptops, for example, by sacrificing repairability and quality, so that it some kind of surpasses your company and your income while decreasing the repairability and quality of your products?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Ultimately, we always want to encourage what's going to be best for the health of the ecosystem, because we think that as long as like the ecosystem around Framework Laptop 13 or Framework Laptop 16 is healthy, that us as a company that's like putting the most energy into building and fostering that ecosystem, that like it's going to be good for us. And so as long as third parties are coming in and building products that work well, basically, no matter whether that's something that we're selling or someone else is selling, we think that's good. That brings more activity, brings more people into that ecosystem. Then, if there are these like additional choices available or different price points available, and if someone's bringing stuff that like doesn't work well or like is like flaky or janky or whatever, then we would want to go and like work with that person to try to help that company to try to help them make something that's going to be more effective. And we think like the participants in the ecosystem, like the actual like community members and consumers, are pretty savvy. So like if someone's building a module or an upgrade that doesn't work well, people are going to know. People are going to talk about it and say like, hey, that thing's like kind of iffy, and are not necessarily going to gravitate towards that. And so like that's why like it's on us as a company and Framework to go and be proactive about bringing those companies into the ecosystem and helping them out so they can build something that works well.
That's a really interesting answer. Thank you. Zach, would you like to ask your question? Zach, are you?
Yes, I'm there. My question is that does Framework support sponsorships to projects, ideas?
In terms of sponsorships, we've done some things in the past, like when we've introduced a new, or what I think it was actually when we started selling main boards in the marketplace, we introduced this like developer initiative where we handed out main boards. We've also done a couple of things like we have like adapter boards when we first introduced input modules on Framework Laptop 16 that we send out to people who are interested in the community. And so that's stuff that we'll continue to do. But beyond that, we don't have like a general sponsorship program or anything like that. It's more that like when we have a specific new developer initiative, we want to find ways to enable developers.
Okay, very interesting. So now we are going to go to Angad. Would you like to ask another question?
Yeah, so I'm curious, does Framework have any plans to offer internships? I know right now I checked the careers page, there's no mention of it.
Yeah, so we have done internships a couple times in the past. Actually, just this summer, we had B. Smith, who was previously a Hack Club participant, and she did an internship. It was actually really interesting. We're going to be sharing more about that intern project soon, and we do have as well a marketing intern who's going to be starting shortly. And so in the future, we likely will continue to do just a small number of internships. We are obviously like a very small team, so we have like limited capacity to put up internships, but that may be something we do again next year.
Very interesting. All right, and I think we are going to start wrapping up here. So if anyone has any, oh, it looks like Sahidi has a question. Yep.
Hey Nirav, again, hi, Sihidi from Atlanta, Georgia. Our founder, Zach Lotta, who you may have talked to, is not on the Zoom today, but he usually does ask this question to everyone who gets on all our A megas. So I'm just gonna like ask it on his behalf. But it's a pretty long question, so bear with me. But say when you get on this call, you didn't actually get on Zoom. And when you click that join button, you actually found yourself teleported to the year 500 BC. And you don't know how you got there, but somehow you realize that you've also become the dictator of the world. And you realize you're on one of three identical Earths in the year 500 BC. And you also realize that in 2050, which is around 30-ish years from now, there's going to be a great war between these three Earths, and only one Earth is going to survive. The question is, what do you, as a dictator of the world in 500 BC, best increase your Earth's chances of survival? And there's three constraints, which is one, you're going to die. You only have the rest of your life to set your plans into motion. And two, you can start anywhere you want and assume you speak the local language, but it's 500 BC and you're limited accordingly. And three, the war is inevitable. So there's no way you can prevent it, but you can picture the three Earths are going to be like in a black box and only one survives.
Yeah, that's a weird and good question, I guess. So unfortunately, if we're thinking about like durability, the most durable things from well, yeah, unfortunately, depending on your philosophy, is probably actually starting a religion that's focused on science and space from 500 BC and proving enough miracles of science based on my existing knowledge of or rather the Earth's existing knowledge in 2024, then bringing back to 500 BC of science to get people to engage, because it's like, oh yeah, look at all these cool miracles that this person pulled off. There must be something there in this science religion. And so starting attempting to start a durable science religion that has some mythology around spacefaring and like certain types of technology and a future that needs to be avoided or not avoided, but rather like defended against this war, and hopefully over the course of 1500 years, whatever it is, that course of science development is accelerated, and people shoot for the stars earlier and be able to escape off into space in the event that Earth gets destroyed by the other two Earths. hopefully that answer works.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that answer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we had three people with their hands up, and I think we've got time for three more questions. So Tim, I saw you had your hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hold on a second. Could someone else go first? I'm having issues here.
I also saw Raymond with your hand up. Do you think you could ask your question?
Yeah. What's a piece of open source software that you really like?
Piece of open source software. Let's see. I like OpenSCAD a lot. OpenSCAD or OpenSCAD, where it's pronounced. It's really cool for being able to just hack stuff up really quickly and 3D print it out. We use it a lot actually, just to build little fixtures or tests of different things. Similarly, like KiCad. So like all these like open source CAD tools have gotten a lot better over the course of the last several years in a way that like they're better and faster in many cases than the commercial tools.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, I personally love KiCad. It's amazing. I think we're Tim, did you work out your technical issues?
Yeah, I think so. Hey, yeah, I'm Tim. I'd like to ask you, in a leadership position, as you gain more experience, did you notice any changes in the way that you acted towards the people who you employed or who like ranked below you as you gained experience?
Yeah, sure, definitely. That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I would say that I've learned a lot over the course of a few years. Obviously, like I've managed pretty large organizations in the past, but in Framework, a big part of it is like being a little bit more growth oriented of like, no matter where someone is on their career path, there's always going to be something else they want to achieve. And so like me learning that I need to be a bit more deliberate about having those conversations and working with each of those individuals to figure out like what is it that they want to grow into, what is it that they want to achieve that they haven't yet, and then finding ways to enable that.
Okay, I think that's a great place to finish it off here. Thank you so much, Nirav. Hack Club has a tradition of counting down from 3 and saying 3, 2, 1 hack at the end of
And also,
an AMA
I just
like
want to
this.
jump in here. If someone has questions that they didn't get answered, wait, yep, Sahidi, you want to explain that procedure?
Yeah, of course. I know a few of you still had your hands up, still have questions in the chat. We'll have something out in the Slack later. If you still have a question you want to ask Nirav, feel free to send it to us and we'll email it to him later. But then I guess continuing off what Brody was saying, keep going, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So if we could all do 3, 2, 1 hack, just to finish this off here, that would be amazing.
So everyone unmute your microphone.
Feel free to unmute,
Unmute
put your
your
hands in, and then we'll like count down.
All right.
Nirav did it.
One of these.
Okay.
All right, so we count down.
All right, 3,
2,
1.
One.
It doesn't work quite as well over the meeting
delay.
with delayed audio.
We do it at every hackathon. It's so fun.
Yeah, but remember, guys, if you have any more questions,
Hold on to them, and we'll put something out about how to get them in.
Yeah, and then thank you so much, Nirav.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been awesome to have you.
Joy.
You've been awesome to collaborate on this. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for organizing it. This was fun.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you, Nirav.
Thank you.
And then everyone that